Hebrew alphabet soup for the soul. Session 2. The Hebrew letter BEIT. Before time, when desire arose in the divine for a partner, for an other, for a story to tell and someone to tell it to, God sought some help. So God turned to the letters and invited them to help God create this story. But then there arose an argument. On the one hand, they all wanted to help, but who would get to go first? Who would get to be the first letter in the story? So one by one, the letters came before God, starting from the back, starting from the letter Tav, and then Shin, and then Resh. One by one they came and they made their case to God why they should be chosen to be the first letter of this sacred story, out of which all things would come to be. The creation, you and me. And God listened attentively to each letter and heard them out and considered their case. And one by one they came and they went, and until they went all the way through the Hebrew letters, all the way to the second to the last, or was it the second from the first of the letters? The letter BEIT stood before God and said, God, I think you should use my letter to start your Torah, to start your story, because my letter is the first word in the word Baruch, which means blessing or blessed. And certainly that is one of the reasons why there should be partners, so that we can bless one another, to give and receive the blessings. Why we should have language, so that we can transform this incredible, majestic, infinite silence into words of blessing. Oh, God was convinced right away. Okay, BEIT, you're on. You start the Torah for us. And indeed, that's what happened. And that's the story of why the first letter of the Torah is the letter BEIT, which comes to be the second letter of the alphabet. So let me share with you the shape of the letter BEIT. So remember last time we did the letter Aleph, and Aleph representing both everything and nothing all in one, or a singularity. The letter Aleph represents the number one, or unity itself. But it also represents silence, and infinite silence, the silence before speech and language, or the quantum, infinite possibility that precedes each word, action, being, all that come into our reality in that quantum space. So it's like a single, almost invisible point that encapsulates everything. So that's where we started with Aleph. Well, when God decided to translate that into language, words and worlds, so God needed to give it a house or a container. So how would you contain Aleph? Well, you start by needing a roof, needing something on the top, right, to contain it, because there's nothing above or nothing greater than, and there's nothing before, and there's nothing below. But what comes after? Well, there's so much that comes after. That's an infinite evolution that going forth. So this is the shape that was chosen as a container for the infinite Aleph, with the roof on the top, a resh all the way around, and then the ground, the base, to keep us grounded. And in the middle, if you look closely, oops, I'm drawing rather than magnifying, there's a little Aleph in the yellow in this dot. So the dot, what that does is to double up the letter. It's also called the vet, but when you double it, you get the BEIT. So think about this shape. What other associations with this shape come to your mind? And the sound, feel the sound in your mouth, right? This B sound, right? Sometimes it's for for our oldest son, it was the first sound that he made. Maybe it's that's why in Hebrew we chose to call fathers Abba, because ba 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 is one of the first sounds that an infant makes as they exercise this power of creating words, of vocalizing, right? Ba ba ba. So it really is a powerful sound, and one that is a nice opening for vocalizing breath. So bet is the first letter of the alphabet that represents sound out of silence, a container for the infinite silence of Aleph. So I want to share with you 4 Hebrew words that can give us a range of the associations that I make with the symbol of bet. Because remember, the powerful thing about these letters is that for hundreds and hundreds of years they have represented not just a sound so that you can spell out a word and record it for posterity, which in and of itself is an incredible invention, a credible technology. But these letters also represent such concepts and principles that that give our culture, our tradition, its raison d'etre, its reason for being, right? Just like the letter bet helped make the case that one of the reasons for using the letter bet to start the Torah, to start the story of creation and the process of creation itself, was because of the word bracha, or baruch, blessing. So the word baruch, so many things you could say about it. There are some wonderful teachings in Rabbi Marsha Prager's book called The Path of Blessing. And one of the things that she mentions as I pull up this word, so if we're looking at the Hebrew and the cursor, that each of the consonants in this word, bet, resh, and chaf, have the numerical value that is connected to the letter 2. So bet, the second letter of the alphabet, represents the number 2. Resh, the 21st or 20th letter of the alphabet, represents the number 200. And Kaf, the 11th letter of the alphabet, represents the letter 20. So the root of the word Baruch, Bet, Resh, Kaf, have the numerical value of 222. So it brings us to the other story that emerged from that initial bet in the first chapter of Genesis. So we have the phrase, Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. With the alphabet, God began bringing into being the heavens and the earth, the light and the dark, the night and the day, the shamayim, the waters above, air, and the mayim, the waters, sea, the sea, yamim, and the land, the eretz. And so the world comes into being through a series of binaries, of opposites, right? Light and dark, yes and no, water and land, sky and sea. And then from there, you have the first 3 days, and then those dualities, those dualisms are then expanded even further. So now we have the lights of the night and the lights of the dark, moon and stars and sun on the 4th day. And on the 5th day, the creatures of the sea and of the sky, right? The flyers and the swimmers. And then on the 6th day, of course, the creatures of the land. And the human being made in our image. And maybe one way to understand that is made in the image of the alphabet, in the letters of the alphabet. So these This story of creation represents an evolution not just of the world, right? From the Big Bang of let there be light, the emergence from singularity to the diversity in the universe and the periodic table and all the elements. But also it represents an evolution of consciousness. So we start with, right, infants see black and white and then red, right, and then more gradations of color. And we hear sort of silence and sound, and then that becomes gray. We variations of that we learn to understand. Well, the process of the mind, of consciousness, understanding or, well, perceiving in categories like that, light and dark, right and wrong, eventually we'll get to, is what the Kabbalists call bina. Bina. Sometimes it's translated as wisdom, but it's not the sort of aha, insight, amazement, that's chokhmah, but the third of the sfirot is called bina, and it's related to the word boneh or bana, which means to build. So it's a constructive intellect. It's an intellect that sort of can take things apart so that it can be built up in new ways, created, to break down the elements, and so that they can be recombined into new forms of construction. So bina is the capacity to distinguish between this and that in the intellect. Okay? And bet represents that in language. And we know the connection between thought and language. We've mentioned that this word already, the third word here, from Baruch and Bina to BEIT. BEIT, or BEIT, which is a conjunction, or sort of contraction of BEIT, is the word for house in Hebrew, and the name of this letter. So we talked about when we drew it that the bet is a house or housing for the infinite, or a housing for the silence, right? A cloak for the silence that emerges into language. So the word BEIT is an apropos name for this second letter of the alphabet, that the first letter to represent sound, and a container for silence, a communicator. The word BEIT also in the Talmud, in Rabbinic Hebrew, is used to refer to a partner or a spouse or a wife. And the partnership and the exchange of love and commitment between two people or more is perhaps what turns a house into a home, right? So with a beta, with a partner, a BEIT becomes habayit, a house becomes our home, beitenu. Speaking of partners, so one of the passages from the Bible that we'll be looking at throughout is Proverbs chapter 31, Eshet Chayo, this famous passage that's an alphabetic acrostic poem in praise of a or more than one women. And it's traditionally sung on Friday nights by a husband to his spouse or partner. And this verse, the second verse, the verse that begins with the letter bet, is Batach Balev Ba'alah B'Shalal Lo Yachsar. His heart trusts in her and lacks no treasure. This connection between the trust that builds between partners, that creates a sense of abundance and blessing. It is a treasure. So this is another aspect, and leads us to the fourth word that starts with a bet that we're exploring, is bitachon. It comes from that word batach, trusting heart. It also means security. And these three dimensions our of capacities to sort of distinguish and reconnect is maybe maps out in a way the three dimensions of consciousness, of soul. So in the Kabbalistic tree of life, there's the intellectual realm, the emotional realm, and the instinctual realm. In cognitive psychology too, where the brain has three parts, right? The cognitive thinking part, the frontal lobe, and the emotional center, and then the instinctual sort of fight, flight, or freeze center. So these, and one sort of is wrapped around the other. And so there's a connection between trust and home and family and love and discernment and the intellect. When I'm asked about the purpose for life, why human beings are here, why I'm here, I often come to these three statements that really our purpose in life, how we manifest this bracha, this blessing of consciousness, is that we're in a process, all of us, our souls, of striving to know and be known, to love and be loved, and to trust and be trusted. To know and be known in the intellectual way, to love and be loved in emotional, and to trust and be trusted in this instinctual way. And this sort of covers these three dimensions of ourselves, of our personhood. And all containers for the bracha, the blessing that flows through creation, this infinite divine flowing into a manifested reality, cloaked in language, in physicality, in bodies, in relationships, in communities. So this is the letter Bet, or Vet. When I see this word in a name, this letter in a name or in a word, it has its own whole sort of range of meanings, and these are some of the primary ones: house, home, differentiation, the capacity to discern and discern right from wrong. So another story we could mention is about the eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil that gives us the capacity for discerning right and wrong. That's the bet arrives when the fruit of knowledge, of this kind of knowledge of distinguishing between right and wrong, this and that arrives. So otherness is a part of that too. That's maybe the shadow side of the differentiation. Light and dark and differentiating night and day, and the gradations of color can add beauty to our world. And there's a sense of otherness, that we are removed one step from the sense of unity, of absolute interconnectedness. So my hope is that this gave you a deeper understanding and a richer resonances with which to relate to this amazing letter, Bet and Vet. Well, may your day be filled with bracha, with binah, with blessing, with wisdom, discerning intellect, with safety of a home and family, and bitachon, the security to know that we'll be okay. Blessings.